Hi, everyone. I think we'll get started. Welcome. Thank you for coming today. I'm Jennifer Johung, the Ooh, okay. Well, I don't know where I should hold this thing, like here. I'm Jennifer Johung, the director of the Center for 21st Century Studies, which is the Humanities Center here at UWM. So I took on this position last year when I thought I had prepared myself for more of the usual, the need to bolster support and budget for humanities research, engagement, and collaboration across the university and also beyond it. But then last spring happened. And C21, higher ed, and humanities education more generally faced a more intense set of barriers. In our case, our university accounts were frozen for a bit. We lost an NEH-funded grant, and we had to scramble to cover our existing programming, especially our publicly engaged projects with community collaborators. And even before all of this, those are the projects that we had to have supported through external grants. But in the face of all of this, we thought it was still right to continue our programming. We have this 3-year arc of programming on slow knowing, the pace of being human, which was last year, slow care this year, and slow action next year. So we could highlight humanities-based methods and strategies and practices. That seems still really important for us to do. And we also really wanted to find ways to keep offering our workshops on how to focus our attention and to refocus, which seemed really important in this climate as well. But we also needed to find new ways to respond. And so I wanted to reach out to humanities advocates across our city in higher ed, starting here because that's where C21 is, but by no means ending there. So we could together find ways to make these uncertainties visible, to think about how we got here and where we might go from here together. So I want to stress that this event is just the beginning, that we hope to start a conversation that gets taken up in different ways and in different perspectives with collaborators outside the university as well, with our partners across the arts, which is my own background, with collaborators who are community organizations or nonprofit organizations, K-12 educators even, that we hope to build a coalition of humanists across these divisions in our city, and that we really want to think about the role of the university within that coalition. So with that, I want to pass the mic on to our Dean for the Humanities, Jason Pushkar, who will give some introductory remarks. Jason.
All right, thank you, everyone. Thanks especially to C21, to Jennifer, Katie, and the rest of the team, and especially to our visitors today. We're so glad to have you here for this important conversation. Jennifer asked me to say a few words about the state of the humanities at UWM, and I replied immediately, it is very hard to say words about the state of the humanities at UWM without reflecting a little bit on the nation and what's happened, because we've had a pretty extraordinary last 9 or 10 months. And so I want to make a few reflections on what we've been through and a few more on how we've come out of it and how resilient we've been. So let's start with the worst of it. In April, the NEH basically canceled all of its grants. Although some of these things are still tied up in litigation, it's not looking great. And that included grant funding to individual researchers here at UWM, as well as to C21. Those NEH cuts included massive cuts for state humanities councils, which fund hundreds of museums and libraries and more, and many of those have university partnerships and extensive community partnerships. The Department of Education has been mostly dismantled, along with its Title VI grants that support languages and language teaching across the curriculum. 2 of those were cut at UWM. The current administration in Washington has called for eliminating the Institute for Museum and Library Services. And if that's not an acronym you know, just know that it's about the same size as the NEH. It's an enormous operation with incredible outreach. The Corporation for Public Broadcasting is shutting down after losing all of its funding in one of the latest rescission actions. And that includes a substantial loss for our university public radio station, WUWM. WUWM is in our humanities division and is part of the humanities here, and I think of it as UWM's largest classroom. And finally, as I think you all know, an executive order has begun scrubbing federal museums and monuments of various unpalatable facts, such as references to slavery. So that has been a rough 9 or 10 months. As far as I can tell, UWM has lost about $500,000 just this year in federal grant support due to these actions. And that might not be a lot to some disciplines, but it's a lot to our disciplines. And we'll have to be more resourceful and resilient than ever. So I think this goes beyond what we're used to thinking about in the humanities as a kind of the crisis of the humanities. As long as I've been in the humanities, 30 years now, it has been in permanent crisis. And if you want to scroll through the Chronicle of Higher Education, I think you'll find that every 2 or 3 years, you will find a new crisis of the humanities. There was a book about 5 years ago that argued that actually the idea of crisis is one of the definitive features of the humanities dating back to the mid-19th century in Germany. And I'm not sure that that's wrong. So still, this feels different. The scale of it feels different. The immediate, I'm sorry about this microphone. Can you hear me if I hold it this far? The material, it's more material than in previous crises. And I think we have to learn how to cope with it a little bit differently as well. And I have no doubt that we will, and we already are. So a few signs of that resiliency already. The first one is, despite the Corporation for Public Broadcasting cut, the listeners of WUWM came through big in the latest fund drive and have maybe not entirely made up for that, but come pretty close, last I heard. The people have spoken about what they value, and that matters a lot. And they're willing to pay for it. Enrollments are up generally at UWM and in many of our humanities programs. Our students are also voting with their feet about the value of higher education and the value of the humanities. Students continue to distinguish themselves in and out of the classroom, and so do our faculty with research, productivity, with awards, and with accolades. I'll just mention one. Leslie Harris from our communication department received a top award from her professional association for her recent book, The Rhetoric of White Slavery and the Making of National Identity. Our scholars are at the very top of their field, and there are many more I can mention. And our programs are adapting to changing times too, with great imagination and great resiliency. When the world is changing rapidly around you, it is not a good idea to try to stay the same. And many of them are responding with tremendous creativity and courage and innovation. And I will just give due credit to our languages departments, which in a moment where it's all too tempting to hunker down and wait till it's over, they're actually responding with tremendous innovation and energy as they merge and reimagine their curriculum. And I think they're going to attract a whole new generation of students to the languages by doing it just a little bit differently. So lastly, C21, of course, which has led this conversation and with renewed energy and commitment to public engagement has brought a new generation of scholars into our halls here at UWM and given us avenues off campus to work more closely with our community, for which we're grateful. So I just want to say that as much as it feels like we're taking it on the chin these days, one of our greatest strengths in the humanities has always been our resiliency and our resourcefulness. If federal grants in the sciences stop funding a particle accelerator, you're not going to accelerate too many particles. But in the humanities, if you stop federally funding a thinking accelerator, we're going to keep finding ways to keep the conversation going, and we might accelerate the thinking even more. And I think what you're seeing at UWM and elsewhere is renewed energy and renewed commitment to do just that. And I'm very proud of what I've seen. The humanities are hard to keep down. It's not going to happen now. So since they gave me 5 minutes, I'm going to humanize a little since we're talking about the humanities by remembering, I think, a very important text that seems especially relevant today. And it's John Milton's great free speech manifesto, Areopagitica, which maybe some of you know or remember from your school days, but it bears rereading. It's 1644, and Milton was incensed because Parliament had required that for anyone to publish anything, they had to get a permit and a license. He thought this was undue interference by the government and that print should not be licensed in this way or overseen by the government. And as part of his protest, he printed and published his own cogent dissent without seeking a license, and got away with it for the most part. So I just want to quote one passage, which I love, which I've quoted before. About midway through, Milton is emphasizing how essential it is for debate to be public, free, and messy. And he says this: I cannot praise a fugitive and cloistered virtue, unexercised and unbreathed, one that never sallies out and sees her adversary, but slinks out of the race where that immoral garland is to be run for, not without dust and heat. It's just one sentence, but I love that last line, not without dust and heat. Now is no time in the humanities to be fugitive or cloistered. It's time to get out there and keep the work going on, despite the challenges ahead. The challenges are real, but so are our capacities, so is our track record. And though we know what lies ahead is going to be challenging, and there are probably challenges we haven't even apprehended yet, we will overcome them. It won't be without struggle. It won't be without major change. It won't be without dust and heat. But we can take the heat. Let's go kick up some dust. And I think some of our speakers today will help us figure out how to do that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jason. I have the incredible pleasure to introduce our four panelists today, all humanities leaders in higher ed from across our city. To my right, and I will say that I have had to very much shorten down their bios. So if you want to know everything that they've done, go check them out on our website or their own websites. Okay, to my right is Arthur Dursey, who is director of the Center for Bioethics and Medical Humanities, and is Julia and David Uline Chair in Medical Humanities and Professor of Bioethics and Emergency Medicine at the Medical College of Wisconsin. He directs the MCW Medical Humanities program and is co-director of the school's Art of the Medicine Through the Humanities course, past president of the American Society for Bioethics and Humanities, among many, many other things. He's also a lawyer. Next to him is Maggie Nettesheim Hoffman, who is the Director of Graduate School Community Initiatives and Student Experience at Marquette University. She is the PI for a $1.3 million grant from the Mellon Foundation and the Humanities Without Walls Consortium to Marquette, and has consulted on humanities doctoral education reform with the American Council of Learned Societies, American Historical Association, and many, many more. An historian by training, her research tracks the transformation of philanthropy in the United States during the Gilded Era and Progressive eras. Next to her is Jody Eastberg, who is Vice President for Academic Affairs at the Milwaukee Institute of Art and Design. Prior to joining MyEd, she served in various leadership roles and is professor of history at Alverno College for 20 years. As a world historian, Eastberg specializes in sites of cultural and diplomatic interaction, especially those between Great Britain and China. She's also the vice president of the Latent Art Collection, on the board of the Wisconsin Policy Forum, and a trustee of the Higher Learning Commission. And last but not least, Michael Carrier is a professor of history at the Milwaukee School of Engineering, where he also serves as director of the MSOE Honors Program. His work has appeared in many, many publications, and he is the co-author of The City Creative, The Rise of Urban Placemaking in Contemporary America. So thank you all for coming together today. I just want to make a quick note about the format of the event and what to expect. You all should have a note card on your seats, but maybe they just ended up towards the front. If you don't have them, we also have little notebooks in the back. And the purpose of this is for you all to write down your thoughts, your questions, issues that come up as our panel speaks for an hour. Right before the Q&A, our grad fellows will come down the outer aisles to collect these cards or pages of paper that you were about for your notebook and quickly collate them. After our Q&A, we'll move up to the 9th floor where C21 is, where these note cards and things you've written down will form the basis of informal breakout sessions, opportunities to network and organize. So we want to hear what you want to talk about more. I also want to say that there is a survey for you to fill out at the end. If you fill out the survey and return it to us, you are automatically entered into a drawing, and you could win, I know, you could win 2 tickets to Cirque du Soleil. That is, yes. I mean, how many times do you win a prize here? I don't know. That is thanks to Katie Waddell, our amazing managing director. So fill out the survey, write your thoughts down. We want to hear from you too. Okay, finally, panelists. I wanted to start by having you think about the moment that we're in right now at your particular institutions. What does the impact of this broader defunding, as well as devaluing, shrinking, policing of the humanities look like for each of you and in relation to your collaborators and partners? Who would like to start? Art, you want to start? Oh, yeah, we have to turn on the mics.
Yay. Can you hear me okay? Uh, the the good news is that we didn't have that much humanities funding to start with in our medical school, and most of it is philanthropy. So that's the good news. The bad news is that we are funded significantly by a group called the National Institute for Health, NIH. And that funding, we were scheduled over a weekend to lose about $25 million, which for the institution, it's a $1 billion enterprise, but still, that's about 2.5%. And it turns out that an organization called the Association of American Medical Colleges said over the weekend when that happened, let's litigate. And they did. And there was a restraining order. And so we're still hanging in there because the funding and the issue had to deal with infrastructure support called indirects, facilities and administration fees that go along with these grants. But they're totally vital to all of these institutions. We at the medical college were not one of the schools that has been challenged like Harvard has, where they just pulled everything. Um, but no question that the challenge is that in the in the tempest that goes along with this, obviously the things we're doing in the sciences want to be preserved and protected. And the humanities comes a little bit later in kind of thinking about how can we strengthen and expand it. So one aspect of this particular time is we do have a little bit of resistance. So we're part of this consortium of medical colleges that are pushing back and saying, excuse me, did you really want to cut cancer research because it was too woke? Excuse me. And at the same time, realizing that there's a bipartisan, I think, support for many of the things that are advancing. But back home in the medical humanities program, I was just at an event last night. It's called MedMoth, and it's like the Moth Radio Hours, except it's oral storytelling where students get up and tell stories, and it's not just Enza who gets to tell, and they actually go through a workshop in narrative medicine by one of our faculty members, and then they get up and do their short piece without notes, and it was just wonderful and amazing to hear these people who are we make them focus on science so much, but to be able to speak from a heart and tell these wonderful tales, all of which had some wonderful moral about character, compassion in medicine, caring in medicine. And it really just brought me back to why are we doing this? And those other things that are going on, important, but the ultimate goal of our education includes the humanistic characteristics of caring and compassion and our students who gravitate toward our programs and take them, I think, are wonderful exemplars of this. But it turns out even people who don't take these programs are able to really participate and benefit from this.
Can you hear me? Okay. So when I was thinking about this question, Jennifer, so I exist within a number of different spaces in the humanities world. So I work at Marquette, but I also work with the Humanities Without Walls Consortium, which represents 16 universities in the Midwest, and it's a project of our humanities centers at those institutions. And HWW, it's based at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. And so I get a sense of what's happening in the region as well. But in thinking about what Jason said earlier, we have been hustling at this for 10 to 15 years. So this crisis of the humanities is something that Humanities Without Walls has been struggling to deal with for the last 10 to 15 years. In my context, it's been about how do we help our PhD students in the humanities think about their career and professional development. And UWM has had a couple of HWW fellows who have participated in those workshops with us in the past. So we've been thinking as we come to sunsetting, what has been our impact on the humanities ecosystem? And I'm not quite sure what that is yet because it's such a massive kind of project to think through. Um, what I have realized, though, is the one-on-one interactions that I've had with students in thinking about resilience. So as I think about the students that I've worked with, I actually had one student refer to me as their fairy PhD godmother this week. So I know I've been able to impact individual lives and to think about joy and resilience at a time when students are struggling with what am I going to do with my future, especially if the only thing I've ever been trained to do is become a tenure track professor in philosophy and the job market has it just really doesn't exist. So that's the first thing I've thought about. I've had to hustle, and that means for Humanities Without Walls, we've had to build collaborations. We've had to have cross institutional projects. We've had to think about what does it mean to be a university, and at Marquette, the largest private university, research university in the state of Wisconsin? What does that mean that we exist in Milwaukee? So as a historian, I think a lot about why Marquette was originally formed. And so when I think about community partnerships, that's, I think, one of those things that will help us weather this particular crisis. At Marquette, we haven't had a lot of NEH grants, so that hasn't deeply impacted us. But it's my friends who work in the humanities who are struggling with this. And is this being recorded? Because I do want to share one story, but I want it to be kind of like off the record. It is. It is. All right. Well, I'm gonna use a little bit of anonymity here, but you might be able to get where I'm going. So a very good friend of mine, who I went to grad school with, texted me last week and said this week has been extremely demoralizing. He works in Washington, D.C., and was one of those folks who had to rush into the East Wing to save artifacts last week. And then quickly had to digitize the destruction of that space. So you can maybe figure out where he's working. And he just reached out to me like and he has to be very careful about what he messages too, right? So that's like thinking about my friends who are laboring in this space, who are going through that, like just providing care, being there for them, listening. That's kind of the moment I think we're facing right now in the humanities, right? So yeah, that's where I'll leave it for now. Yeah.
Thanks for that. Can you hear me now? Okay, great. So as a historian, I couldn't help but also just, it's hard to answer just about this moment on this question because this is something that's been going on as I was thinking about it, forever as an answer. Also the 1990s and the culture wars, even, and then I had written down 2012. So you mentioned about 15 years ago when and I'm not speaking for I've been at MyEd for 3 months now. To know everything. I have colleagues in the room, so step in. But from other contexts in the humanities generally, as major enrollments have been declining, since 2012. So we have been in this work. Also, I'll say as a former chief reader, and I'm always so grateful to UWM and Dr. Mary Wiesner Hanks, who is a mentor of mine. I was the chief reader of the AP World History program. The conversations that happen nationally about that curriculum have always been, in taking that role, you're taking on kind of a political space automatically because of the way that the nation views its history and the way that history is taught in its classrooms. So with all of that, like I feel like this is very much a continuation of a conversation, but we are in a particular moment. And I was at a conference in California last week with the dean of a major research institution in the region. And he got up and he reminded all of us that this is not normal. And we do need to, like, we were kind of going through our like organization business, just kind of ticking through things. He's like, hey, everybody, just take a second. Because what's happening at this moment is not normal. Why all of this? Why this long history? Why does it go back to Socrates? Like what we teach our students in the humanities. It's because it matters. And I think if anything right now, if we just remember that the work that we do as humanists really does have an impact, people see the impact of what we do, the way that our ideas can shape communities and cultures. That's why it's a topic, and we must embrace that. That is a part of public discourse, the work that we do. Um, at my ed, though, what I'm learning about the culture there is incredibly heartening about how the humanities are alive within an institution that does not have a humanities major. And I think it's interesting. I was saying to Michael before that you've selected 3 people who don't actually have humanities majors within their curriculum to have this conversation. I think that's a great place to start thinking. Like, what does it mean? Why do we that don't have an imperative necessarily to have a humanities program? Why are the humanities so vital to our institution? So we have about 800 students who we prepare for careers and lives in creative industries like industrial design, communication design, illustration, animation, fashion, interior architecture, as well as fine art and studio practices. And so whether they're on a very direct line to a job in those fields or are on their path being artists themselves, Myatt and its faculty across all of the majors emphasize the importance of the humanities as fundamental to the development of every student's future as a creative or as an artist. So all of our students receive a robust writing curriculum, traditional humanities courses, discipline-aligned art history courses, service learning requirements, which are very much embedded in the humanities, travel experiences, and more. And the reason why we put such an emphasis on that is because it helps support our students develop their emerging sense of self, whether that's as a professional, as a designer through the history of design, or as an artist, where the sense of self is so compelling and so important to great work. So I'll just say that the humanities are very much alive at MyAd. It's a wonderful community of faculty, and I look forward to talking about more examples. But I would just say that we have a haven here in Milwaukee of the humanities where people are really dedicated to seeing how those disciplines are really supporting the students, all students that graduate from our institution.
I'm somewhat in a strange position because I run essentially a humanities program at an engineering school, and engineering schools are doing pretty well. It would take a lot, I think, to hit our enrollment, and so I have had access to a pot of money that stayed remarkably stable. It was never large to begin with, but it was enough to do things. And I've tried to, for lack of a better term, do a form of wealth redistribution, taking engineering money and really intentionally steering it towards projects that I think are useful, and obviously including my students in that. But at the same time, that kind of cushion and also my own academic work has given me a perspective to think about the humanities. And one of the things that I've noticed, and I'm hoping that this is kind of like, what are the humanities for? And that may seem like a really basic question, but I've noticed, and this is particularly true in Wisconsin following the Great Recession, and then when the Walker era begins, you got to defend what these things are, right? You got to make a case for them. And inevitably, the case that seemed to carry the day was they are a potential economic driver. And then inevitably, Richard Florida comes out and says, "Look, you're a creative class." And you can even trace that back further to the culture wars when the idea of funding individual artists like Robert Mapplethorpe or how dare government money go to piss Christ. How are you going to define art, or how are you going to define the humanities? It's an economic driver, and I think that's not a good way to do it, honestly. I totally understand the argument, but I think once you do that, you make it remarkably easy to put the humanities on a budget sheet and then say, it's done. Rather than saying, no, it's about human experience, it's about stories. No, it's about economic growth. We can do that some other way. And indeed, places can. If you look at some of the fastest growing economies in states in the United States, there's states that care little about arts funding. And that says, I don't know what that says, but nonetheless, to make that argument, I think it took something away from it. So not to say I'm happy about this moment of crisis because it's horrible. I mean, it's horrible for a lot of reasons. But if it allows us to kind of reclaim, and you hear this, Mike, I think in the introductory comments from all of the speakers so far, like if there's a way to reclaim the heart of the humanities, why not now? And so I'm hoping that that comes out of this.
Well, I am reminded of two things. A few of us were on a listening session that was held and organized by the Wisconsin Humanities Council, the State Humanities Council. And one thing that came up was resiliency, especially when it comes to people living in the city of Milwaukee, that we are just fighters. We're used to doing this. We're in the situation before. And that also, as some of you were bringing up, that we have found ourselves. I also invite a lot of historians, if you want to know. It's like I was like, oh my God, 3 historians. It's like, and also people who are fighting for and advocating for the humanities in institutions where there's not necessarily a unobvious platform or major for the humanities. And I think that's something to think about. But so what came up in this listening session was that we have been here before. It's not like we haven't been here before. They might seem more intense. Some of us might seem more targeted. But can we think about strategies that we used in the past? How might that help us now? I know at C21, I'll just make this very brief. There's a funny little thing that I'm just like extraordinarily excited about. Anybody knows me is like, I can't stop talking about this human club thing. But when I was thinking about this human club, which is fun and free outings, I was thinking about the history of Dadaism, thinking about, reacting against the rise of fascism and what did artists do in these times of crisis. And I think that came up for us. The other thing is what you were saying, Mike, which is this moment has really pressed us to say, what are the humanities and who and what are the humanities for? I'm reminded of an anecdote that Jason said, I think in one of our public humanities meetings, when you're like, there was a study, I was just telling this to Art, there was a study done by the American Academy of Arts and Sciences a few years ago. They asked a bunch of people, like, just people on the street, what are the humanities? And the majority of people were like, oh, is it bloodlet? Is it like giving blood? It is like, because they thought like, oh, humanities equals humanitarian causes. So I think we are in this moment where we are fighting for our funding, but also for what it is the humanities are for. So this leads me to my next broad question, which is, how did this moment clarify for each of you with your collaborators again in your institutions? What was it about the humanities that was worth sustaining, fighting for? What made it, what about this moment made you think about, okay, we need to start to sustain these particular things? We really love to jump. She choose.
Well, because I am a historian that works in the nexus of like the history of philanthropy, I'm always thinking about how do we keep things sustainable and scalable, and where are the new sources of revenue that how can we innovate in thinking about funding the humanities? And so for me, and Jennifer and I have had a lot of conversations about this in the past, right? Like, how can we like collectively organize and uplift everybody that might be doing the humanities in ways that are invisible to those of us in the academy, right? And so I'm thinking about things like, fandom, popular fandom. Where are the humanities happening for academics that we don't see as being visible? And how can we make that visible as we think about funding projects, funding the humanities, making the articulation that the humanities are happening and they are thriving. That's the thing. The humanities are thriving. Bar none, they are thriving. And I will give you an example of where I see them happening. Comic cons, fandoms. I have a friend who was one of the co-founders of Houston's Comic Palooza, which is Houston's version of Comic-Con. And he majored in philosophy here at UWM. So he's a graduate of UWM. And he became an IP attorney and practiced down in Houston and became a co-founder of this event that drew something like 50 to 100,000 people every year. And he led panels on the philosophy of Doctor Who. Right. And interviewed the different actors who played Doctor Who over the years. And one year, in the first year, he proposed this panel on talking about philosophy and Doctor Who. The Houston Chronicle covered it, and it was standing room only for people who wanted to come in and talk about philosophy. Then they were invited to do the same panel at San Antonio's version of Comic Palooza, which is called the Alamo Comic Con. And it was 300 to 400 people. Now, for those of us academics in the room, how many times have you ever gone to a conference where you've had 300 to 400 people attend your conference panel? Right? It's really good, right? So that's my way of saying the humanities are happening and they're thriving. And as academics, we need to find out where they are happening and we need to uplift them and make it visible because they are happening. And that's what I think has become something that I've been thinking a lot about. And even here in Milwaukee, there's so many spaces where the humanities are happening to the listening session that we attended earlier this week.
And if I can jump off that, thinking about sort of spaces where you might not think about the humanities existing and what they mean, I'm at the point now where I see the humanities as a form of survival. And I say that 2 weeks ago, I was at a show in Chicago for a band called Home Is Where, and they're an independent band. I don't know what to call it. But two of the members are trans people. And they're very vocal about this. And they showed a documentary about the band that was just made before the band played. And fan after fan that was interviewed in this documentary said, without this band, I wouldn't be here right now. And when they said I wouldn't be here right now, they meant I wouldn't be here right now, period. Humanities and then finding joy in that music, right? It wasn't just about I'm barely subsisting. I'm finding joy in this place. So it's their survival. I have some students right now working on doing oral histories and telling the history of Voces de la Frontera. One of the things that someone that works with them said, if this doesn't get done now, some of these people might not be here to tell these stories. Survival. And so that I don't want to make this really awful, sound really awful, but I think as the context we set this conversation up for, it is an awful moment. And in this moment, can the humanities be a mechanism of survival? And in the process, save those things that we need to be saving as humanists or whatever we are.
And I'll just jump in with these are great examples of scale. I'm going to go to the most, just like that teacher-student scale for a moment. I was supporting a student who had an interest, probably because of Comic-Con, in learning the history of Japan. And so I agreed to do an independent study as a student. And we were talking, I kind of let her do what you do in independent studies, explore, tell me what you want to know more about. It's fun for me. And of all the topics, she really got into the Meiji Constitution. And this is very recent that she wanted to do this. And we had a conversation. She was struggling with like different forms of constitutional governance and just needed more definitions and what some of the terminology and one of the monographs had. And she was like, I've never thought before about the different types of constitutional governments. It just so happens that the Meiji established a monarchical system. And so we were like, just kind of grappling with that. And, I've taught this content for over 20 years. Nothing felt so relevant than the conversation that I was having with that student in that moment for her and for me.
Yeah, I would say that. So at the Medical College of Wisconsin, our students are going to get a job in medicine, pretty likely, no matter what happens. But having said that, they will be poorer. They will be less compassionate, less caring, I would argue, but I don't know that we've been able to prove that. They might not be as good listeners if they don't have this. And it is so enriching and important for them. There was a wonderful resource that the American Medical Association had for 20 plus years. It was called the Journal of Ethics, but it was plus medical humanities, even though it wasn't in its name. Things like art work that was included, often with a medical theme and a little analysis going, actually really into the history of the work. And it was done in collaboration with the Chicago Art Institute of Chicago. Really wonderful resource. Oh, and it was free for medical students, so you could assign, and the articles were wonderfully short. So they were easily accessible, easy to read because, sorry to tell you this, medical students don't read much. I'm sorry to say it. I went to law school. Law students read. Medical students, they don't read much. But they read these, and they looked at these, and they benefited from these. Well, the EMA has decided it's going a different direction. A new president has said, this isn't bringing in any revenue because it was free to students. And we're looking at AI and we're looking at, things in a different direction, a real loss to our field. And so it's on us. We need to be able to no longer rely on them to bring these wonderful things to our students. We need to bring them to our students, and we're going to have to work harder.
Yeah, I think this leads me to ask, and this relates to what I was saying before, that we at C21 have had to get project grants that are like, they run the fiscal year, and we think, okay, that's great, but this is a project that is just starting. How can we, this relates to my question about sustainability. How do we maintain things that we have started? I mean, you talk about these wonderful moments, and a lot of times in these examples, it's about a certain individual who's doing this. And I wonder, how can we talk about scale, how can we scale up? Like, what do we need to do? I think the question always comes to me because, everyone is thinking, oh, C21 is this like huge humanities center. I'm going, we have like one full-time employee. She's sitting right there. I still teach classes. And so, but how can we expand and extend, and how we think about maintenance over longer periods of time? I think, both in terms of the practical, like where is the money coming from? We're still fighting to figure out how to expand and extend our attention activism workshops past this year when our grant runs out. We're like, where are the other grants? We've kind of tapped everything. So both the logistics of that, of the maintenance of these kinds of moments that you each talked about, and then also, the scalability in terms of concept or allyship or connection or that kind of thing. You go.
As the highest ranking administrator on this panel, uh, logistics are everything. I thought maybe I wouldn't have to talk about these things that's not on our list. Just teasing. So how do we do this logistically? Everyone will have a better answer, I'm sure, than me right now. But I think that one thing I mentioned before, what's working at my end is actually the very close collaboration at an institutional level where there's an understanding and support of humanities curriculum and projects kind of institution wide. So we had like we have a faculty staff exhibition every year. And they include the humanists in that exhibition, and we have a evening where we do readings. And so that was last week. We had 10 faculty and staff who participated in that event, which I think, we're a small institution. We're not UWM. We're a faculty of 50 people. So you think of the percentage of people who participated in that way. And it's because it's woven in, again, very intentionally to the curriculum. So I think that that's one thing. And then when we talk about collaboration, this is one of those areas where I think in Milwaukee, we have lots of great examples of collaborators on this panel. In Milwaukee in general, we can do better to really assess like what are the unique resources that we have institutionally that will support these types of projects, and almost if we can be more articulate about that, share that more often. We have such, again, like in the creative space at my end, in the design space, we have so much to offer our colleagues. I know we have a faculty member in industrial design that's currently working with the mechanical engineering department at MSOE. They just do that together with their students because you need both sets of knowledge. And I think we just need to find who are those, what do we have to offer people would be really helpful. I didn't say anything about budgets the whole time. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll echo that collaboration piece in terms of partnering with academic institutions, not only within Milwaukee. And so I'll try to shout out some other folks that I think could totally be up here. But so currently I have students working with Trudy Watt, who used to be at UW-Milwaukee, is now at Madison. It's a wonderful partnership. I have students working with my faculty. I have students working and work with Rob Smith at Marquette. And so what we've realized is if there's certain pots of money at those various institutions, if we pool it together, then you might be able to do something. The continuity piece in terms of thinking about relationships, not even if the money is one-off, to think about those relationships as multi-year is something that I've tried to do. And that includes with my student population as well. So I try to take on projects where there'll be turnover with students. So if students go for a year, I'll be preparing another cohort to take their place. In many cases, they're free labor. So that's nice. And that kind of maintenance or upkeep of relationships extends to community partners as well. And that in turn, then when they're looking for funding for whatever they're doing, they're more inclined to include you. If it's for this project or even for projects down the road. So I think being very strategic about collaboration, as Jenny suggested, writing it into curricula very explicitly, and then understanding that this is a multi-year process.
I'd also like to just say we haven't talked much about philanthropy, but your favorite topic. And of course, they come with handcuffs, right? Because their philanthropists are interested in certain things. But for us, that has been our major source of ability to do things and expand. We do have some minor grants, but most of our grants tend to be in the sciences, and those are at risk too right now. And so suddenly, philanthropy is looking better, and I think it's something that often, if you build your case, and you are all storytellers, so if you build your case, you may be able to at least persuade for that. But it is true that that only gets you so far. And then community collaboration, we are fortunate in that we have collaborations with the Milwaukee Repertory Theater, with the Milwaukee Symphony Orchestra, with Milwaukee Art Museum. And those don't come with a lot of cost for those collaborations. And we're hoping that eventually about half of these students from our school will do residencies in the area and stay in the greater metropolitan area, and they may become subscribers and donors to the institution. So there's a little bit of a hope with that connection. So that's actually been wonderfully collaborative, and it's been a source because we're a place with we're freestanding medical school with a pharmacy school and a school of biosciences, but we don't have an English department, we don't have a history department, we don't have a department of art. And when we were trying to establish this program, they said, well, we certainly understand you have, chops in bioethics, but this medical humanities, I noticed that none of you have a terminal degree in any medical humanities. It takes a lot of chutzpah to be able to say, we want to teach medical humanities. And fortunately, we have been joined by a few doctorally trained, an anthropologist, Katika Hoyer, who was trained here under Paul Brodwin, and a few folks generally ensconced in a department and doing mostly clinically oriented things, but then they can also help you in the medical humanities as well. So philanthropy and friends who are willing to collaborate on projects.
Maggie, can I get you to talk about philanthropy? Sorry, that was very loud. I'm also thinking about the op-ed. I don't know if you want to talk about that you wrote with a member of our audience here, Amelia DeTore, who is executive director of Turner's organization. I'm thinking about that. And Megan McGee, who's right here from Ex Fabula.
Yeah. Well, do you want me to start with that, or do you want me to get real radical?
Well, all of these are.
Yes. Okay, so well, I think that philanthropy op-ed is an example of the type of thing that I'm going to advocate right now for my friends in the academy. And that is, I take the mission of Humanities Without Walls, that title, seriously. We need to tear down our institutional walls and get ourselves into the community, not just to do research in our community, but to actually partner reciprocally and redistributively with our community partners. So how can we leverage the resources at our academic institutions to collectively organize as a unified way to uplift all of us who are laboring in this space in Milwaukee and in Wisconsin? That's a question. I don't know that I have the full answer to it, but I think the relationship that I've built with Emilio and the Turners, with Megan and Ex Fabula, that are going to make that bigger, is to think about how do we uplift all of us together. We can't do this alone anymore, academics. We can't, and we can't continue to replicate the harmful research practices that we initiated in the 20th century, right? We cannot be extractive of communities anymore to uplift our own research projects or our universities, right? So how do we tear down those institutional walls and partner with our community partners? And I think it's in that way that we can, oh, did I lose my mic?
The First Amendment. State institution.
I will turn that off. All right. So yeah, now that I'm back, that's I think the way that I would start is to think about how do we really think about funding and philanthropy that is in a reciprocal, redistributive relationship with our community partners. To think about the things that we talked about at the Wisconsin Humanities Listening Session, right? How can we partner to think about innovative humanities projects in the community? And so Jennifer and I have been ideating an idea that would model this. Could we create some type of community-based consortium of humanities organizations, including higher education in Milwaukee? Chicago does this really, really, really well. And if you look at their Chicago Humanities Festival as an example of that, it's now Chicago Humanities. It's not the Chicago Humanities Festival. I know, Katie, you must, yeah, right? So could we create that kind of model? I don't know. But that's my call to action right now for all of my fellow academics in the space who care about this. Because we live in a great city. We have such great, bountiful resources, and we have so many wonderful organizations and people doing the work of the humanities that I think we need to be working on this together collaboratively. Yeah, that's the answer.
And this leads perfectly into what I imagine as our last topic of discussion, which is ideating. Like, we've talked about individual moments, connections, collaborations, relationships that each of you have had that have been meaningful, important. Mike said, in some cases it's about survival. So I'm wondering for each of you, what do you want to imagine as possible, specifically in our city? What would that look like? I feel like you've all kind of touched on this in many ways, but in a broader sense, what would this look like? Now you said, thinking about this network. And then also, what would it take to get there? And I'm thinking specifically about our city in relationship to, but different from Chicago. One of the first questions at the listening session was, what is it about the humanities in Milwaukee that's an asset or a strength? Like, what do we have here that we can build on?
So I'm currently working on a book on a record label called Touch and Go Records. So I kind of have music on the brain. And we brought this up in the listening session. I think Milwaukee has a tremendous music scene, both present but also past, that the city does not honor enough and does not support enough. I think you can see that in hip hop. I think you can see that in punk rock and other underground music. The idea, for example, and again, this was brought up at the listening session, there's a club, the Cactus Club, that wanted to do all ages shows. And you would think, well, what better way to introduce young people to the humanities or the arts than to allow them to congregate, make music, and enjoy music? The city made that a huge pain in the ass. And it took years for that to work out. There's other licensing issues for venues, or even venue adjacent businesses, where the city makes it exceedingly difficult to support arts and arts adjacent activities. So for me, the idea of what I hope to see is the city taking humanities seriously. It's clear that this audience is, well, where are the policymakers? Where is DCD? So there's all these other actors that I think could step up and really provide support in meaningful ways. Changing zoning doesn't call for $2 million. You could do that. I won't say fairly easy, but cities are doing it right now with housing pretty easily. So how can you muster the support of the city administrators to support the humanities? That, for me, I think is a piece that is incredibly important.
And it, all right.
I think
Oh,
Okay. So I also had kind of my last point here was policy. So I appreciate that you said that, Michael, that I think Milwaukee as a city has to acknowledge that there's a big initiative right now about growing the city of Milwaukee. That will not happen if one of the biggest industries here, the creative industry, isn't brought into that conversation and isn't essential to our economy and to the ways that we're thinking about growth. There are big parts of American economies that don't show up here in Milwaukee. One of them being it's here, but there are parts of the creative industry that have not been able to really thrive here because of policy decisions. And I think the Cactus Club is a great example of just how hard people are working to do things that really with some thinking should be very easy and embraced. And then the second thing that I will say is like we really just need to celebrate people who are doing this work. And I know all of you have like your favorite people, your favorite organizations, but if you don't follow Cree Miles, Always Black, her amazing social media feed, she is the representative in that space for Penguin. She's I didn't know that. She's Mike's next door neighbor, and it has a huge national reputation, and we need to lift our community members up who are doing this impactful work that has huge breadth. And the other thing that's sort of like that, if you think about it, the public museum, a huge amount of money is being infused into that institution, which is claiming the space of being a cultural museum. So how are we all going to show up with and for that institution as they build out that space as well? So just trying to figure out where are the spaces that are really activated right now and lifting those up in all the ways that we do.
okay. So this is where we're going to come back to philanthropy now. So in thinking about the Turner's op-ed that we wrote in September, I think it was published in the Milwaukee Business Journal. If you haven't read it, and in that we really tried to argue where are Milwaukee's foundations, right? Where are Milwaukee's foundations when all 25 of Wisconsin's AmeriCorps programs were cut in March? We personally lost a planning grant at Marquette where we were working on placing or creating a graduate student focused membership program with AmeriCorps funding. And it was called Capacity Milwaukee. And we were going to place graduate student researchers into nonprofits to collaboratively co-design a capacity building research project for that nonprofit organization. And we lost that. But we weren't the only ones to lose it, right? 25 programs across the state of Wisconsin lost their AmeriCorps programs. Friends lost their jobs. And I think the Serve Wisconsin, which is our AmeriCorps state affiliate, went down from like 8 full-time staff members to 3. So even though the court injunction was successful and that funding came back, it really hasn't. It's really decimated that service-oriented model in our state. So where are the foundations in Milwaukee? We have over 1,300 nonprofits in the city or in the county, and we have philanthropic endowments of about $38 billion. Certainly, I think the collective power of those philanthropic organizations could provide bridge funds, maybe not overcome the loss of federal funding, but they could certainly provide moral leadership and stewardship by creating some type of unity fund. For example, 3 foundations in San Diego have now created a $70 million endowment for creating a unity fund for their community to help uplift nonprofits that are struggling with these types of federal cuts. So I think if we could create some type of collective action consortium that partially could make this case to our community-based foundations. So I think that's one thing that we could do as we think about this question, Jennifer. Yeah.
And I want to say I love these ideas. The Medical College of Wisconsin was once Marquette University School of Medicine, but it was spun off for a number of reasons, including it was a big money loser for Marquette University. But yeah, and somehow we're still a big money loser. No, not really, not really. We must.
The football team.
Yeah, we actually did have a football team. But we lost the university. So we're a freestanding medical school. And, if we're thinking about health policy, well, we used to have a health policy institute, but that's closed too. Like we don't have the resources that a university could provide on, you know, government and health policy and a number of other things that could really inform and help us. And there are other areas as well that I think it would be really helpful. Like when we're talking about ethics, it's based in philosophy, and we don't have a philosophy department. And, we would be so enriched with interacting with folks like that. So I do think we need to reach out more. And happily, I mentioned Paul Broadland, UWM, because UWM has been a partner in some areas, including some important firearms injury and other injury prevention work. But I do think that the life of humanities in the community, there's not really a Milwaukee Humanities Festival. And it would be wonderful if there was something like that. But I do think the connections and just being able to, participate on this panel is really beneficial because it's just wonderful to know that other people who are doing medical humanities are passionately interested. And I have appreciated being on the C21 advisory board since we've been in conversation. It's been great.
I should add there is a small, I apologize if I don't remember the number. I think there is a small group of arts organizations, I think it's 12, who have collectively organized to raise funds. I think it's this, and I apologize, I don't remember the name of it, but that there is that type of model. Yeah, Megan.
Small arts and culture cohort, and it's 11.
11, yeah. And it's a couple of years old, it's a few years old, right? 3 years.
For great edupont pedagogy.
Great.
Collaborative models. So it's about collaborative models for logistics and support, as well as for, creating ideas together, maintaining relationships, that kind of thing. I really appreciate all of your ideas. In my mind, it's something that Dasha Kelly, former poet laureate here, said the other day. She said, Milwaukee's full of pollinators. And I keep thinking okay, what if we could just pollinate the pollinators? I think that so much of the time, at least when I took over the center, it was I didn't want to think about programming something over whatever else was going on because there's so many things that are going on. So what if we just listened and looked and talked to our friends and started more of these conversations and shared information and resources and banded together? What would happen then? And I think these examples here that just came up are great examples of grassroots collective organizing. And this is the kind of thing we're hoping to continue. I'm I cannot believe I'm actually, not only have I kept to time, but I'm a little early, which means there's more time to open it up to the audience, to share some of your resources that you may have, ask questions of our panel. I just want to quickly plug some C21 events now that I have you all here. Everything is on our website, but we've changed our website. I don't know. November 8th, we are hosting a attention activism workshop. It's being run by an amazing artist, Symphony Swan, at the Creative House. It's a workshop on memory activation. More details on our website. November 15th, another attention activism workshop and these are the things that happen on the weekend. So I think sometimes people in the university are oh, look, I don't know if I can go to that. But please try to at least, I don't know, look at some of these things. November 15th, we are participating in the Haggerty Museum of Art's Community Art and Wellness event. One of our community collaborators, Madeline Dolker-Berlin, who's a mental health specialist and social scientist, will be leading a workshop on what she's calling the listening and sound bath of the ordinary, which I love. but yeah, we are, we're trying to figure out how to sustain these collaborations, and I'm really heartened by all of your examples and imagining. So thank you all. Oh yes, yes. Okay, so anything that you've written down on an index card, thank you, Katie. Katie's like, please remind everyone. Now is the time to pass them to the outer aisles. Our graduate students are going to collect them and quickly organize them into most top concepts or issues so that we can have more discussion upstairs. So, pass them to the aisle. And then if you have questions right now that you would like to, or things you would like to share, yes, Lee. We have a microphone. Oh, wait, hold on. Lots going on, lots of people moving.
Thanks. We've talked a lot about sustaining sustainability, finding ways to keep projects going. But we haven't really talked about, we talked a lot about funding running out, but what about personnel resources? Jennifer even made the comment of like, there's one full-time employee for C21. There's one full-time employee where I work here at the Mathis Gallery on campus. So how do we in Milwaukee where we're constantly like punching above our weight. And so there's a lot of work that's invisible because it's passion driven. How do we how do we make that work visible and show that we are driven by passion and that that's could burn out? And how do we kind of show, particularly on college campuses, how do we show students that their work is valuable, their work should be paid for? Like, how do we keep these things going in fields where oftentimes unpaid internships are so prevalent and commonplace? And how do we, and we're the ones, the full-time employees, who are working beyond the business hours, or we're working beyond the hours that are being paid for, because it's our passion, because we're, you know, doing all of these efforts to, you know, lift up humanities in the city. I don't know. I don't have, I'm sure we don't have an answer. But just some thoughts on that I think would be interesting, particularly in like small Milwaukee, where we're all stretched thin and we're all trying to collaborate across the city in different ways.
Thank you, Lee. Yes.
To where I hate using, I'm obviously sick and I'm feeling bad about using other people's microphones. So like talk here. So Mike, does it also get sick? I've been thinking a lot about this from a kind of workforce development perspective for artists and designers. So there's a new book out. It's called Artists at Work, and while it's about practicing artists, I think that there is a correlation to humanists that might be. It's all about kind of what do we need to do in the policy space around that. And so two things I think that I could, in my role, I could do to try to steer my ed, whether this is new information to them, they don't know this yet, is I want to say professionalizing, but I'm going to say professionalizing our work study programs so that that students actually are developing credentials as they're doing that work. It's work that's, supported by the institution. We have a lot of student employees on campus, and I think we could be doing more to mentor students to provide them with work that has meaning, and that they could actually turn into kind of resume building or at least work experience. And because I'm sick, I've forgotten the second thing. But there's another idea that I have about workplace readiness. Let me think if I can pull it back. Nope, it's not going to come back right now. But once I'll remember it as people are talking. But definitely, we have a really robust innovation center at my ed where community members can come and have design work, artistic work, whatever our students are able to do, where they can come and work as a client with our students. And we did that because we had so many requests by people that were like, oh, can you design or blah, blah, blah. And we're like, absolutely, if you pay our students. We'd be more than happy to help them to develop the skills it means to work with a client. And we give back professional level work. So maybe some examples like that can be built out with different disciplines in mind.
So I don't have a good answer for this, right? So I am a staff member at Mercat, so I don't have tenure. So, and especially as somebody who's soft money funded, economic precarity is real. So That's first. Second, I think any grant project has to think about, well, who's the staff applying for the grant, right? Who's the staff that's going to manage the grant? So we have to, for some reason, it just seems like grant projects in the academy tend to forget that component, right? So if you're working on grant projects, right, like, and you're writing that, you have to think about the budget and how the resources are going to manage and fund the staff. And in recognition that most grants are limited. So how do you do the professional development and the workforce development for those folks? What's the transition plan? I often think that for those who might have positions of power in higher education, if you know you have grants, build offboarding plans for people who are soft money funded, so that once that we're not coming to the end of our grant project and we have nowhere to go when that grant ends. And I actually recently heard a story of someone who worked on a STEM grant at an institution that won't be named, and her faculty member was going to retire. And so he didn't want his colleagues to know that he was not going to apply for another grant. And so she said, well, what about my job? I'm not going to, right? I need to start looking for another job. He asked her to not apply so that wouldn't, for other jobs, so that wouldn't cue to his department that he wasn't renewing the grant. So if you are in a if you are in a leadership role in the academy, I would please ask you to think about those soft-funded grant funded staff members who need real formal offboarding plans. And then I think too, like, the academy really needs to think about redistribution. How do we, I know it's hard. And I know that even at Marquette, where we're thinking about how do we cut $31 million over the next 7 years, and we're living in a constant state of austerity at this moment, it's hard to think about our institution having resources, or at least maybe for folks at that level where they can make those budget decisions, but we do. Especially when I think about some of our smaller liberal arts colleges. Like, I'm an alum of Mount Marion, so I often wonder, how are they making their, it's our positionality. So, but that's where I would start. And then maybe if you're at an institution that can unionize. Yeah.
Other questions? Amelia.
Not so much a question, ma'am. I'm very loud, I apologize. Not so much a question, but I do want to draw attention to something I was thinking about when listening to Maggie Michael speak, and it's something the dean has been involved in too, which is QWERTY Fest, which is a very unique way of celebrating and elevating the humanities here in the city. And what I love about it is it links the academy, it links nonprofit institutions, it links our unique history, it links the business district, it links the public libraries. So you've got broader than just social infrastructure. You've got this great celebration, which I anticipate and hope it continues to grow. And I think that this is a really good recent example of innovation in a way that all of us should be taking a look at, because it's not forcing institutions to fly under one institution's flag. Oh no, this is, so-and-so's event, bend the knee. It is a really uniquely Milwaukee experience, which I think celebrates a lot. And my God, if you listen to the typewriter-driven music in Turner Hall, you need therapy. No, I'm kidding. But it's really unique and novel way to celebrate a broad swath of the humanities. And the other part I liked about it is that there was an open tent forum where different people were able to showcase their wares. So you had Pete Protol, who's a professor here, and artists and illustrators, and the local radio station from River West with a broadcast range of 2 blocks, and printmakers and musicians, all showing the different elements of their arts and their creativity in this larger thing. And I just want to lift that as a great example that other people should be emulating.
I think you could make a corollary, a cuisine culture of the law. So there's Asia Bolsert as Maya, the Maya. The Central Library hosts the Zine Fest. There's 100 young people who are returning to print zines, not seen since like the 90s. And QWERTY Fest has its own zine. And so I think there's this really interesting.
Can I add on to that though? Because one thing that QWERTY Fest is doing, they're doing amazing stuff, but they don't have any funding.
and Zine Fest. I also know the organizer for that who has passed it off. But the way that they are funded or not funded, how many people, there were so many small businesses and nonprofits that their participation in that was unpaid. And so far, those things are being done as a labor of love, but in a way that contributes to this unsustainable nonprofit martyr complex. So I think it's also, we should lift these up, but we should also be critical, not of the efforts, but of the ways that they are happening, which is as unpaid labor. And then who does that exclude from participating?
So I'm going to say something critical, and I kind of went back and forth on whether I should say it at all, but I decided I'm going to say it because I'm saying it out of love. Um, I think we cannot be having conversations about the future of the humanities featuring four panelists who all appear to be white. And the humanities, if we say we're going to represent the city and be engaged in the city, we need to really seriously think about race and represent race in thoughtful, meaningful ways. And so it's hard to say that we're doing this work with a straight face if we're not featuring voices of people who are actually doing this work, who don't look like the people currently on the panel, even though y'all are all great. So again, I'm saying it with love, but I think we need to be mindful of this as these conversations move forward.
And I think I'll respond to that. We focused our panel on higher ed because that's where C21 is. And I just want to say, this is a representation of higher ed in our city. It is not a when I say we're starting a conversation, we're trying to create a coalition across divisions. This is what it is. If you look at higher ed, a lot of us participate in other kinds of community organizations or K-12 educators. Those panels are going to look different. And so how does that happen? Why does it happen? And that's not only a problem in our city, it's a problem a lot of places. But yeah, thank you, Leslie. That was pointed out to me just by the very fact that we made a poster. But those are the kinds of conversations we need to have. This was organized, in relationship to higher ed. But again, the undercurrent here is that, who gets to think that they can major in a humanities degree, get a higher degree, and then, apply for one of these positions. Yeah. Especially in this climate.
Yeah, can I say something? And that is, I totally get that. And yet, when I went to that event last night, I'm just seeing if I can pull it up. The voices of these medical students. First of all, medical schools are no longer that way. And I think it's in part because of advancement more of women, African American medical students than men. We still really need to reach into that group. But we have a lot of sons and daughters of immigrants who, for various reasons, decide that medicine is for them. And so the stories that I heard last night at this event, I would say were significantly nuanced by mostly sons and daughters of immigrants who are medical students and minority students, African-American and Hispanic students. So I think the faces will change, at least in medicine and medical humanities. And this is just a minor fact, but the new president of the American Society of Bioethics and Medical Humanities is a wonderful guy who happens to be African-American named Patrick Smith. And he just gave his inaugural address like a couple of days ago at the conference. But I think for us, it's going to take time because if you're going to get in medical humanities, or you're going to be in a medical school, you can be a scholar. And if a medical school's got enough money to hire scholars, they're, going to be pulling in a different group. If it's going to be physicians who are doing or writing, often it will be a certain look, but it might be like Abraham Verghese, who is a wonderful writer and a medical humanist at Stanford who, happens to be um, Indian American as a background. But I totally get it, because if you said we want a director of a medical humanities program in the United States who is not from a majority view, or I don't know about whether or not Asian Americans count or don't count. But if you exclude, those folks, there's, I think, not a lot, but I do think it will grow. So I don't know if that's helpful insight.
Thank you for bringing that up. I'm actually, when I went to the bathroom, I was thinking, I understand the leadership and the expertise on the panel, but none of you guys function without us. And you have so much community leadership that actually impacts you doing your jobs. And so it's not a bad thing, the panel, but there's just chunks of the pieces of the stories that are missing. As being somebody who leads organization and works and has worked with every single college and organization you guys represent in research and other, I just thought it would have been a really cool perspective to almost do a double expertise panel, because that relationship already exists. The lack of telling that story within itself is part of the issue that we're having, because it doesn't set the case for the value of what is being done, because it's not an entire story, but it's happening. It exists.
Yeah, I kind of want to go off of that too with having these initiatives that I'm sorry, I forgot your name. Talked about with like providing not teaching work experience to students on campus, and that's wonderful. It's not accessible to all of the students. International students are very important, especially in the humanities as well as in other fields. But I think I'm one, stance is even more critical since we don't have a lot of the protections like STEM students that do, for example. So I think that's another important group to consider, especially, and I'm grateful you brought up the sons and daughters of immigrants in medical schools as well.
To kind of Maggie's point about the AmeriCorps program being shut down, that was a program that really did offer job opportunities, trained to individuals, and especially provided the capacity to grow out nonprofit organizations. So to your point earlier, you were talking about, well, how do we have staff? Well, AmeriCorps provided staffing to nonprofit organizations to build out their capacity. And right now we need to be looking at the state to say, if we lose this federal funding again, which is very likely, how is the state going to make up the difference? Because Tony Evers was trying to propose something to have a match in the state of Wisconsin budget, that for any person who participated in AmeriCorps, you would receive your federal education award and also a state educational award. And that was only going to go to students who are attending university and colleges in Wisconsin. So if we're talking about providing workforce training, providing capacity in nonprofit organizations, providing fundings to our school, this is a solution to all three of those things.
Other questions or comments? These are all really important for us to think about. As I was saying, this is just the beginning. We're really hoping to, not hold all events on campus, not just talk to people in higher ed, that we're really seeing this as a starting point. I will say that C21 has been around for, what are we, like 56, 57, something like that years? It used to be C20. So we've been around for a while. And in these 56, 7, 8 years, for the bulk of it, other than the last like maybe 3 or 4, we've been an insular research institute and only recently have realized, thinking about some of these questions, like what are the humanities? Who are they for? Who's doing the humanities? And what's the invisible labor? Who's taking on extra work that they're not paid for? We're like, oh my God, well, we have to actually open our doors and get out more. And, and that work is hard. And I think some of the logistics we were talking about in terms of just being able to maintain relationships, we love all of our friends. And I think one of the things that came to me when we're like, oh my God, we don't have money to support our programming. I was like, well, we still have our friends and we have our allies and we have people that I've been talking to for years and they're still there. But the question is always, when Maggie was saying we need to resource share, well, we're like, we want to but that resource will end, June 30th or whatever. These are the things that are on my mind as we think of the next 56 years as looking very different. And I really take your point to heart. I want to imagine this thing happening again in 50 years and looking different, having different conversations. So this is important for us as we move forward and think about the direction of our center. And I think for all of you and your programs. So I really thank you for your thoughts. I think now we can move. Is there any lingering thoughts from our panel? Comments, questions from the audience? The point about AmeriCorps is so important.
Here's one. I mean, here's one thought. So I just went to a celebration of 75 years of medical history and 50 plus years bioethics at the University of Wisconsin Medical School. And I was at lunch with a resident in surgery who is LGBTQ. And she was really, really disappointed about the fact that they had these wonderful banners that used to hang from the rafters in the school. And they represented different communities. And they came down, at the University of Wisconsin. Don't ask me why. Don't ask me how. And she said, it's really disheartening because I don't have feelings of, discrimination or problems with my surgery residency. They're really supportive. But just the symbol of this coming down is so disheartening. And I said, you're young and I'm a half century older than you are, and things will change. And the importance of funding of humanities initiatives, which right now is suffering from vagaries of an administration that hopefully will not remain in office forever because there is an amendment that may or may not be respected. But it will change. And believe it or not, that was actually hopeful for her to hear. Like, you're old enough, so I guess maybe things will change because we have seen things move back and forth. And hopefully they will move forward.
So just 2 points. When Jennifer asked me to participate on this panel, I think one of the hopes was that this would inspire future conversations, hopefully not even based in an institution of higher education, but in a community-based organization where we can talk about all of those types of partnerships that you just mentioned, or we could talk about the humanists who might be doing work through AmeriCorps programs, right? That it's not just us looking like us here, but how can we catalyze an event to continue the conversations? And then hopefully that's what will come out of those conversations upstairs in a little bit. Second, the last thing I want to say is that we need, and we talked about this at the Wisconsin Humanities listening session, where are our corporate partners? Many of our corporate partners in the city have philanthropic arms, and they have missions which suggest to support community-based initiatives. But I know I've worked with one through some of the programming we've built at Marquette, and that process of how you get money from those corporate partners and their philanthropic arms is really it's not transparent at all. And how can we demystify that process? Because I'm sorry, if you're a Fortune 500 company and you have a community-based philanthropic arm and you're not giving money to Milwaukee or making that process easy to apply for funds for organizations, we need to, I think, collectively work to advocate for all of us with them. So that's what I want to say. Corporate partners.
I don't know if I want to end with corporate partners. Like, That's all right, Maggie. It's all good. We need to figure out how the money runs and how to support each other. I think that's where we will end. Again, we are going to go upstairs. There will be breakout rooms. Our amazing grad fellows have gone through all your comments and organized them. So if you can take the elevator, which is working, we had a contingency plan and coolers in the back of the room just in case there is food upstairs. And, we can just talk more about this. So please join us upstairs. And thank you so much to our panel for joining us today. Thank you.